gentle marketers. Welcome to episode 89 of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm and changing it to a gentler approach, one that's based on empathy and kindness. I'm Sarah Zinacroce, I'm the host here, and you know that you're in the right place if you are a heart-centered entrepreneur or change maker who is looking for a different, a better way to market your business. Or you might also be a marketing impact pioneer, so someone who's working for an organization who does business for good. If you're a regular here, you know that I'm organizing the conversations around the 7 Ps of the Gentle Marketing Mandala. And if you're new here and have no clue what I'm talking about, you can download your one-page marketing plan with the gentle marketing version of the 7 Ps of marketing at sarahzinacroce.com/one page, the number 1 and then page. It comes with 7 email prompts to really help you reflect on these different Ps and how they look like in your business. So today's conversation fits the second P, the P of personal power. And this is such a big part of becoming a gentle marketer. In the Gentle Marketing Revolution book, I have an entire part dedicated to rumbling. So meaning rumbling with your story, becoming the person who you want to be. And that starts with learning and knowing who you are. In the last season, under the P of personal power, I talked to my friend Leslie McDaniel about knowing your personality. And today we have another Leslie under the P of personal power. And it is my friend Leslie Marchant. And we are going to talk about the power of self-love and self-care. Leslie Marchant is a licensed clinical social worker, founder of So-Yo-Co Wellness, a TEDx speaker, and author of the new book, The Self-Love Journal, Banish Self-Doubt and Learn to Love Yourself. She writes and teaches about personal wellness, professional self-care, and how to renew yourself and inspire others through her blog and online courses at www.soyoco.org. In addition to her 25-year career as a clinical social worker, she's a registered yoga teacher and certified life coach and spends her free time reading the latest research, books, and articles on wellness, positive psychology, personal development, and entrepreneurship. She and her husband live on their organic and pasture-based farm in Texas with their 4 kids, 7 dogs, dozens of pigs, hundreds of turkeys, thousands of chickens, and acres of produce. So on this episode, we talk about, first of all, Leslie's organic farm in Texas. I couldn't help myself but ask a few questions about that. And then we dive into her journey as a social worker in hospice care and how that led her to write a book about self-love. She explains the 4-part process that she talks about in her book. So the 4-part process of self-love, how self-esteem is different from self-confidence. So really interesting point of view. And also what self-love has to do with selling and so much more. It's a great conversation, and I'm really happy to share it with you. So here we are, Leslie and I. Hey, Leslie. So good to speak to you, see you, hear you. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We've had this kind of in the works for a few months now, and I'm like, yeah, now is the time. We need to talk about self-care. It's always the time to talk about self-care, right? But
it really is.
Now especially. So, but I actually want to start, and we just talked about it a little bit offline. I want to start with the organic farming. Right. Because as I said, not every guest lives on an organic farm. And I actually saw, like, we've known each other for a while, and I kind of followed your transformation or how you gave up your house and you moved full time to this farm. So tell us a bit about that and your journey with that.
Right. So again, thanks so much for having me. And it's really fun because you have seen the process. We've known each other for several years. So when we first met, my family and I were living in a suburb of Houston. And my husband had decided a few years prior to sell the previous business that he had and start farming. So we started on leased land a few miles from where we were in the Houston area. Quickly outgrew about 5 acres, then moved to about 20 acres, and we're outgrowing that and realizing this is what we want to do forever. And so we sold the suburban house, put everything in storage, bought our farm that didn't have a house on it. So we lived in a temporary place for a year. And now we live in a tiny house on our property, and we raise chickens for meat and eggs, and pigs and cows, and have a bunch of dogs that protect all the animals. And then we have massive gardens and grow a huge range of greens and produce items.
Wow, that is so unique. I love it. I just love it. Is that like a common thing in, I want to say in the US or in Texas? Because it takes a lot of courage to do what you did. And I don't know, I have this image being from Switzerland that, a Texan wouldn't necessarily go for organic produce. Like they would go for the beef burger instead. So
right.
How does organic farming fit into Texas or the US in general?
Specific to Texas, but the US as well, the way that we farm is fairly different from most of the people around us. There are people farming and ranching all around us. Most people, whether they're doing produce or animals, are kind of one product. So if it's animals, most people raise cattle. Mm-hmm. And they're more likely to raise the cattle and then sell them where somebody else takes over after a certain point to take that product to market. If it's for meat, or if it's crops, they might be what's called monocrop, where they just grow wheat or corn or soy or, whatever it might be. And so we do a little bit of everything. And a big part of it that's organic is a term that we use often, especially when it comes to animals, is pasture-based. So all of our animals are on pasture and we rotate them around the farm. So they're constantly on fresh grass. So it's this whole ecosystem of, what's good for the animals is good for the land, is good for the people. And so, like with a garden, we might have run animals through a garden area because they add fertilizer to the soil. And then after time, the soil quality has improved. And then you plant a garden there and it just is really beneficial. So we are kind of odd man out in how we do things and in the variety of things that we grow and in this organic and pasture-based way.
Yeah. It made me think that, like in marketing, I often mention this term slow marketing. And it made me think that this would almost fit to your farming. It's like, let's slow things down. Let's, respect nature. Let's, treat everybody with respect, including the animals. So it's a kind of a slower process, but it obviously makes for better food. And it also makes for a sustainable business in a way, because also you're respecting the soil, right? What we often hear is that we're abusing the soil and then nothing works anymore.
Yeah, so true. And it's interesting you use that terminology, which I don't think I've heard you use before. There actually is a term, slow food. And it's obviously in contrast to fast food in terms of from the consumer side. It's going to a place where it's not going to be fast because it is going to be prepared with fresh ingredients while you're waiting. And that is very connected to the way that we do things.
Yeah. I remember when we first moved to California and I was like in the, grocery store, I was just amazed at the size of everything. Like the broccoli would be like blown up and everything was like double the size in Europe. And I'm sure it's because, they just used so much fertilizer or whatever to grow it faster, right? And then you get this watery kind of texture and it just doesn't taste the same. So that's also what happens when you slow things down. Like it actually gets more flavor, I would assume.
Yeah, Very much so. And that's across the board with all produce and meat items and things, and sometimes it's a matter of what seeds you're using or what type of food. But like we grow a certain type of celery that we use for eating and for putting into the juice that we make. And it's a different type of celery than you normally buy in the American grocery store. But it's like this deep, rich green compared to the almost white green of celery that's huge. And ours is much smaller, and you can taste and see the difference on every level.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So good. Yeah. And I remember seeing your juices. So you actually take it a step further and don't just sell the produce, but you started to kind of make these smoothies and all these different things. Right.
Yeah. Right. That's our newest thing, is making all of these veggies with mostly what we grow here. We do have to buy some for other things, but, green juices and carrot juices. And, when we just, you never know when you're getting into something, what's really going to take off. The thing that surprised us is we make almond milk as well. And people really want just fresh almond milk. So it's one of the things that surprised us that's really taken off.
But can you grow almond trees in Texas?
No, we buy the almonds. I think they actually, I'm trying to think if they're from the US or from somewhere else, because of just the limited ability to get them grown without any pesticides or anything like that. So yeah, we buy the almonds and then make it from there.
Nice. Wonderful. Wow. So glad that I asked that question. I always was curious how that works.
Right.
You wear all these other hats as well, though. And so, yeah, I want to kind of get into, the social worker part. So you work as a social worker in hospice care, but you also are an author of 2 books. And that's really what we're talking about here. And one of them is the 5-Minute Happiness Journal. And the other one is the Self-Love Journal. And talking about taking off, like this book has really become like a bestseller on Amazon. So congratulations. It's like, it was so nice to see that thing just take off, right? So tell us about that journey. How did you come to, write these books, and tell us more?
Yeah, that's another piece that I think you were there for, some of the just strange, serendipitous journey that it has been. Yeah, I have these different parts of my life, and for me, they all fit together really well and play into each other. Working in hospice care is very intense, which is, my career as a social worker is what led me to focus on self-care. So being able to live at the farm is, a big part of my self-care, because I can leave all of that behind and come be in nature. And so I've had a business. I still work full-time in healthcare, and I've had a business for several years that's focused on self-care. My primary people that I kind of teach and work with are other mental health professionals. So I have a website and some content that I create and online courses. And so somebody found my website and my social media presence and actually approached me about writing the Self-Love Journal, came to me with the topic and a basic outline and said, seems like it fits with what, you focus on in your work. And it just was a perfect fit.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it's doing so well. And I've seen the copy, and it's what people want and need right now. Right.
Yeah.
Talking about wanting and needing, like oftentimes as authors, and I think of myself, like we write the book that we wish we had on our journey. Was that the case? Even though maybe you didn't know it, is that what it felt like for you?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, because as you know, my focus a lot is on self-care. And that's very much because I've needed to focus on that, partly because of my work and the intensity of it. I mean, I remember several pivotal moments early in my career as a social worker. I started out working in homeless shelters for families. So I was, having families come to the shelter that had nothing. They may or may not have had a job, but they couldn't afford a place to live. And they would stay in this shelter. It was actually the Salvation Army where I started, which is known at least nationally, maybe internationally.
Yeah, we have it here too.
Yeah. And I just saw working in that field, everybody, in my opinion, goes into that work with a heart of gold and wanting to help make people's lives easier and more functional and help make the world a better place. And it's just really easy for it to drag you down. I mean, when it's sad and it's hard and it's intense. And so when you talk about burnout and these things that are so in the forefront these days, because we're all dealing with this intensity with the pandemic, I just remember very early on making a decision, because I would see some people that were burned out and or kind of like bitter, working in this field, like they had lost the reason that they started doing the work in the first place.
Right.
And I remember making a commitment to myself that I would always evaluate how I'm doing and why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, and make the choice to figure out how to stay in a good place myself or get out completely of the field and do something different, so that, ultimately I'm not doing more harm than good if I'm not in a good place of being able to help people. So, that work-wise is how I got into this. I think personally, and I think this fits very well with your work, I am an introvert. I consider myself an introvert. And I think I've always known that about myself. And I grew up in a very extroverted, community. And my parents were both very strong, extroverted personalities. And, I really had to find my way. And I think when I was younger, before I understood my strengths, I think I questioned things about myself, because I knew I was fairly different from a lot of people in my life. So I think for me personally, it's been a lifelong journey of really learning to stand in my strengths and know who I am, even if they don't fit a mold that, maybe I was expected to fit in, and to love myself for who I am and to find my place in the world, because I feel like a lot of places, jobs are carved out for people that are more extroverted. And I always knew that there was strength in who I was and who I am, but it just took a while to move through the nuance of finding my way. And so, yeah, I feel like when the book came to me, it was kind of the perfect way to share some of my experience in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting that you shared something from your upbringing and your childhood, and because it's always there that we get these beliefs that we think we're not good enough, not, smart enough, whatever, not enough. Right. And
Right.
Those are the things that really then, form us in a way where we are maybe not loving ourselves 100%. Yeah. What would you say, like, people who really love themselves, like, what is it that they have worked on, or what makes them different from other people who are still having this self-doubt all the time?
Right. I think it's an ongoing, lifelong process, and it's very much from the inside out. And I think our society often teaches us to view ourselves from the outside in, of what's considered, external success and, whatever those perceptions are.
Yeah.
And I think it's very much an inside job. And so there are a lot of kind of words and terms that we use that all start with self. And I think they're all important. And I think in my mind, there's kind of a progression that starts with self-awareness of just, who am I and what's going on internally, and how do I see myself? And from that place, how do I take care of myself? How do I have compassion for myself? How do I grow in my self-esteem and confidence, which I actually see as a couple of different things. And so there's just this progression and kind of healing process. And it is a never-ending journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious, you just said something, you see self-esteem and confidence as two different things. Tell
Right.
us more about that. What is the difference?
So I see, and when I was doing research for the book, I found some research on it that differentiated self-esteem and confidence. And self-esteem isn't necessarily my most favorite word, but it's one that everyone kind of has, even if they couldn't give you a definition, they, have some understanding of what it is and that it's a good thing and that you hope to have good self-esteem or high self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
which I see self-esteem as that kind of internal piece of being comfortable in your own skin.
Mm-hmm.
And I see confidence or self-confidence as a little bit more external and what you project out into the world. And so some of the research that I found was about, and I think it was specific to women executives that are kind of in high levels of business. They may have a lot of self-confidence, but that didn't necessarily mean that they had self-esteem. And so that's where, when you hear the term imposter syndrome, I think that's where that comes into play, that somebody can have confidence. They can be out putting themselves out into the world, and people see them as successful and happy and confident, and maybe translate that into self-esteem, but we don't see what's going on the inside. Right. If there is that question of, like you said, all those questions of, am I good enough, or that type of thing. And so it's a matching of the inside and the outside. I think we need both, but they're not necessarily always connected one to the other.
Yeah, I love that distinction. It really speaks to me how I think I shared with you that I'm currently writing the second book about selling. And all we hear in selling is you need to have confidence, right? It's almost like they tell you, you need to show up with confidence. And so clearly showing up is like this external thing that you always, it's like you can buy confidence and just put it on. It's this thing that you can put on, where clearly, I think the people who are really good at selling, they're good at it because they worked on their self-esteem, because it's an inside job, like you mentioned before. So that I see that distinction clearly. So tell us a bit more about the book. You kind of structured it around 4 phases. Could you take us through those 4 phases a bit?
Right. Yes. So it's divided up into 4 sections. And I mentioned before that I think things start with self-awareness. And this is some of my background as a therapist as well, is, all of the different therapeutic models, they do start with self-awareness, and then they go into self-regulation. How do we change our behavior and that type of thing? So the way the book is, and I'm looking at it to even see the verbiage that we used. So the first section is start where you are. And when I was writing it, I like alliteration and acronyms and things that help you make sense of things and also to help you remember. So for me, this is starting with this, I guess you would call it alliteration, that I came up with, is let it be. So it really is this awareness of kind of, where do I stand when I really look at, how do I feel about myself? Do I have self-esteem and a sense of self-love? What kind of voices are in my head when I'm talking to myself? Is that a critical voice? Is that an encouraging voice? How confident do I feel when I go out into the world? All of those things, just really truly assessing where I stand, because we can fool ourselves almost as easily, or probably more easily, than we can fool other people sometimes. So it's just getting really honest is the start where you are. And then the second section is on banishing self-doubt. And in my other mindset modality, it's let it go. So those things that we find in ourselves, once we've really assessed where we are, we take those things that we perceive as negative and find a way to let them go. And the book is a journal, so it gives you opportunities to write about these things and process them.
Why don't you hold it up for the viewers on YouTube? They can actually see the cover. There it is. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's really beautiful. Also inside it has lots of colors. It's a beautiful journal.
Yes, I love how it came out. So yeah. So then the second one is like I said, banish self-doubt and letting things go. So it's kind of, journaling your way, coaching yourself through letting go of negative beliefs and thoughts that you might have about yourself, so that then you make space for the new. And so the third section is building self-esteem. And when we talk about self-love, I like to think of it as letting love in, because I think sometimes internally we have like this hand up, like stop, like, I'm not going to let that in, I think sometimes it's fear-based, like, what if I get hurt, or what if I'm wrong, or what if I, go out and try something new and I don't succeed. So we kind of, keep some walls up. So I think it's kind of starting to let that sense of love come in and be willing to receive it, even though it's coming from ourselves. And then finally, the last section is love yourself more. And I think once we've let love in, it's about letting it grow. And that's the lifelong part of constantly being on this journey that, if I'm cruising along, doing good, feeling good about myself, and then something external happens that makes me doubt, then I go inside and kind of go, well, okay, what can I learn from this? And how would I do things differently next time? And try to come to acceptance of whatever happened.
Yeah. Could we, since we kind of talked about the self-esteem versus confidence, could we pick one or two of the journaling questions that you have under that chapter and kind of look at them and go a bit deeper?
Yeah. I think I'm trying to remember if it's in that section or not. The one thing that I would love to talk about, and I don't remember exactly which section it's in, is we think in terms of hearing voices in our head or talking to ourselves. I don't know about you, but that used to be very taboo, and like people think you're crazy if you admit to talking to yourself. Especially if it's out loud, which I get that, if you're a social setting, it might look awkward if you're talking to yourself. But the reality is we are all constantly talking to ourselves internally. And so one of the most powerful practices that can be done in so many different versions and settings, whether it's writing it out or just thinking through it or doing it with a partner, is listening to what those internal voices are and identifying a voice or a part of yourself that is a self-critic, and then identifying a part of you that is a guide or somebody that is really another part of yourself that's very encouraging, and then letting those two parts of yourself have a conversation so that the guide can nicely talk to the critic. Because the part of ourselves that is critical, it wants something good for us. I believe that there's all these different parts of ourselves, and they ultimately all want what's best for us. It's just the way they go about it. Right. So the critic is trying to protect us through fear. And so if we let the guide come in and say, you know what, though, this is something that I really want. And so I'm going to try it, and I'm going to set myself up for success as much as I can. And I'm going to be really compassionate and graceful with myself if it doesn't work out how I want.
Right. Yeah. I do this visualization, like a guided meditation, where I meet my wise woman. Right. So it's this meeting with the wise woman, and it's, obviously I don't really meet her. So it's almost like a voice in my head. Right. But this is kind of like that. It's like this other version of me who's saying everything is okay, we'll figure this out. And I love that idea of always having the two voices. And yes, you're right. I think the critical voice is always there to protect us. But then sometimes we do need to, tell it, yes, thank you very much for protecting me, but let's hear the other voice and let them also have a say. Especially, I used to go through kind of a period of insomnia. And what would help the most is if I thanked my mind, my brain in the evening and said, thanks so much for constantly thinking and figuring things out. But right now, I would just rather sleep. And you can, shut up now and come back tomorrow morning. But that really worked. Like, instead of getting upset that I kept thinking, I was like, look, thanks so much. I really appreciate you. Without you, I couldn't do the things I do. But right now, I just need my rest. So.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you just instinctively were doing that piece of understanding that there is a positive intention behind that part of yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pivotal piece in any way you do that process, is understanding that it is trying to protect you and have what's best for you. It's just, okay, let's try it a different way.
Yeah.
And let's save this for later because I need my sleep right now.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. What kind of feedback are you getting from people? Because literally the book is doing really well on Amazon. And so do you get personal feedback from people who are telling you, this has been really helpful to me?
Yeah. So some of it is just reviews, which, sometimes people are specific on how it's helping them. And I have had people reach out directly, whether it's people I know or don't, and say that it's just really helping them. Because it's like anything, it's a tool that if you actually go through the journaling exercises and the practices, that it can make a big difference. Yeah.
And it's not the easy work. Like I say in my Gentle Marketing Revolution book, it's like, in marketing or selling or anything business related, we always want to do more because we feel like that gets us to the next thing, right? We just need to hustle more or do more or learn this new thing or get this new tool. But working on the being, that's the hard part, because it's, again, to end how we started, it means that you need to slow down. And it means that you're going to be uncomfortable because some of these things that come out, or you don't necessarily want to hear them. You don't want to say them out loud because they're not always, just super positive. But that's what self-awareness is. It's like going deep and finding out, well, what's there? What can I unpack?
Right. Yeah. And that's where I mentioned before, all of these self words. I think it's important that they all kind of go together. My focus, a lot of my work has been on self-care, which I think is doing these practices that help ourselves. And then I think that's kind of an action we take. And then like a mindset and kind of way of being is self-compassion, which, there's a lot of work out there. Kristen Neff, I think, is the most well-known. And Chris, I think his last name is Germer, that works with Kristen Neff a lot on self-compassion. That it's, when we find these things about ourselves we don't like, it really is directing the same compassion towards ourselves that we would to anybody else in our life that we really care about. And to me, those are both precursors and pieces of what ultimately is self-love, that we have to be practicing self-care and self-compassion to have that inherent sense of self-love.
Yeah. Wow. So today we really wanted to focus on self-care, but I do also want to ask you about your other book. So the book about happiness, and clearly it's kind of this double take when you hear that a social worker in hospice care wrote a book about happiness, right? So tell us more.
Yeah. I think it's fun, because I think we think of happiness, and I think everybody knows that there is this deep sense of happiness, but I think it's easy to think, oh, well, going out with friends or going on vacation is what brings me happiness. But really, to me, happiness is the same as self-care and self-love. It's something that's deep and abiding, and that is an inside job. So I find the contrast fun. for me of working in these intense settings as a social worker and therapist, because people often ask me, if I'm out somewhere and say, what do you do for work? And I say, I'm a hospice social worker. People go, oh, does that make you sad? Are you sad all the time? How can you do that? And to me, yes, it's dealing with real life and there is sadness. But when I have a deep sense of purpose and meaning and know that I'm connecting with people, there's also this deep sense of happiness as well. So in my mind, happiness is a deep, abiding trait that we can live with. And it's not just this fluff. And, and the book is the 5-minute happiness journal. So it kind of implies like, you can be happy in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. So that is some of the feedback. There are a few more negative reviews on that book because it's like, oh, it's not what I thought it was going to be, because I think people do think, oh, what can I do to just flip the switch in 5 minutes? And it's just as deep as the self-love journal, but it is about finding what truly makes you happy, clearing out all the rest, and making space for what gives you that deep, abiding sense of happiness and joy. Mm-hmm. And for me, my work is part of that, even though it may not make sense that I can be happy when I'm working with very difficult life circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like there's a parallel between, how we said before, self-esteem and confidence being more like the outside thing, and self-esteem, the inside thing. Well, maybe there's another word for happiness where, something is more inside and another word would be more of the outside as well. Like,
yeah, there are some technical terms that it's one of the things I find fascinating is all of these things are studied in, very academic institutions across the world, from, positive psychology and happiness and self-compassion. So there are some very technical terms. One of them is eudaimonia, which I think is that deeper sense. And there's another term, I forget, it's not coming to me right now, for the more kind of surface level. And to me, it's having both. Yeah. We want to be able to just go out and have fun and laugh at something stupid that has no meaning. Yeah. And we want that deeper sense as well.
Yeah, it's like the excitement kind of happiness that's kind of short term,
right?
And the deeper level happiness that is more long term, and it's more like fulfillment, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could go down some really long and winding rabbit holes on all this research, which to me is fascinating and fun. And the fun part of working with my publisher and editor is that, my job was to take all of that research and stuff and put it into everyday language and practices. So you won't find those terms in there. We'd go through these edits on both of the books and I would have all this technical jargon and they'd say, okay, say that in, normal speak.
Yeah.
So the depth is there. It's just, you don't need to know all of that. But if you have an interest, I think it's fascinating stuff to research and study.
Yeah. So what you're saying, it's not the book that somebody had just thrown together with a bunch of, Pinterest quotes or whatever,
right.
It has a solid foundation that you did the research on. It's just that since it was a journal, it's now like organized in questions pretty much. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I do think it's very much a process that can help someone go from, one place of being to another. So that's my hope. And I'm sure you feel the same about, your book and the one that you're writing now. We want to offer what we've learned in our life in a way that can be helpful.
Exactly. So do share with people where they can find the 2 books, please, Leslie.
Amazon is the best way. They are, I forget the term that they use, but print on demand.
Print on demand. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So you may be able to find them in the US. We've got Barnes and Noble. There may be other places you can find them, but Amazon is the easiest way. And
Yeah. So we'll mention the 2 names again. So the Self-Love Journal and the 5-Minute Happiness Journal.
Right. Here's the 5-Minute Happiness Journal. So
I love that cover. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Great. Please also share where people can connect with you, like your website and other social media.
Yes, I'm in the process of changing it, but right now, and it's an acronym. So the URL is soyoco.org. So it's SOYOCO.org, which is an acronym for social work, yoga, and coaching, which are my 3 training modalities.
We didn't get to talk about coaching and yoga, so we'll have to do that next time.
Right.
It's been wonderful. I always ask one last question, and that is, what are you grateful for today or this week?
Oh, I love that question. The gratitude piece is a big part of the happiness journal as well, because I think it's important to find a sense of gratitude. So for me today, I mean, love talking with you. We haven't talked in ages. And, I think a piece of that has become more pronounced in the pandemic is how we can connect with people virtually, which, you and I were able to connect from different places in the world years ago and stay connected. And I'm grateful that we have that opportunity.
Yeah, me too, Leslie. Let's do it again.
Yes, definitely. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure. I so hope you enjoyed this conversation and found some interesting reflections in it. You'll find the show notes of this episode with further links at sarahsandacroce.com/GBR88. Please also check out Leslie's website at soyoco.com. Also check out her book, The Self-Love Journal, on Amazon. And while you're there, why not add the Gentle Marketing Revolution book? It really also starts with this finding yourself and, of course, using self-love in your business. Thanks so much for listening. Next week's episode is about the P of people of the Gentle Marketing Mandala. And I'm talking to Kathy Goodwin about storytelling, but a slightly different approach to it that I really liked. So tune back in next week. And in the meantime, let's be the change we want to see in the world. Speak soon.